In yesterday's reading, there is a summary of all that the book of Judges is about. It begins at 2:6, and particularly noteworthy is verse 10, which, in a way that recalls the introduction to Exodus, says that after the generation who had seen all of God's works died, another grew up which did not know the Lord or all that he had done for Israel. The rest of chapter 2 is an explanation of what will come next, which is a narrative that alternates between oppression and salvation. The agents of salvation are the judges, whom God raises up and empowers with his Spirit to inflict massive damage on their current overlords. But here, Judges supplies the explicit answer which Joshua repeatedly refused to give us. The reason why the Israelites failed to drive out the various peoples was because of their unfaithfulness, their intermarrying and subsequent engagement in idolatry. And another reason is added in the beginning of chapter 3, which is that this new generation was not trained in war and so needed some experience. The book of Judges continues the violence of the book of Joshua, only instead of destroying cities, which held the prospect of non-combatant slaughter, here we have a number of more entertaining stories, focusing on more obviously deserving victims, narrated with grim humour and mocking gruesome details. Ehud comes from the tribe of Benjamin, which, as 2016 says, had a large number of left-handed warriors. Being left-handed, as in boxing now, makes you a trickier opponent. Ehud builds his rather simple plan around it. The dagger is short, straight, double-edged and made of bronze. A normal dagger was curved and edged only in one part, so it was used for chopping and not stabbing. Ehud's dagger also has no crosspiece where the blade meets the handle. It can therefore be hidden along the length of his other thigh, retrieved at speed and plunged straight in. Eglon takes Ehud's secret message seriously and makes sure they are alone. When Ehud ominously says that he has a message from God for him, the king, despite his preponderous portion, stands up to receive it. Later, Jewish sages were impressed by this action, and a tradition developed that because he stood up in reverence at the mention of God's name, he was counted worthy to have Ruth as one of his daughters, and thus to feature in the lineage of King David. But these are later reflections on this story. The emphasis in the text is on the humiliation of the one who has humiliated Israel. The sword is so short and the fat so thick that it completely disappears. The narrator piles on the grim detail by mentioning the voiding of his bowels, which serves the following comical scene of the servants smelling it from outside and waiting for ages, cringing in embarrassment. One gets the sense that, despite how distasteful it might seem to us now, such a story in the way it is told was meant to be enjoyed, both for its black humour and the satisfaction of divine vengeance. The story of Jael and Sisera has some similarities to the Ehud and Eglon one. The assassin lures the victim into a solitary safe place before brutally impaling them. The prophetess Deborah, who is the current judge of Israel, is not the one who performs this killing. Rather, in verse 9, she informs Barak that the glory will go to a woman instead of the commander of the army. The reader first assumes she is referring to herself, but instead this obscure person does the deed. The scene is wonderfully dramatic. The husband is not present when Sisera staggers up, and culturally speaking, Jael should not have invited him in, as this could be misinterpreted. Women had their own tents, and she takes him into hers. She is using a heady mixture of being alluring and comforting. As a guest, Sisera is not supposed to ask for things, but he asks for a drink and tells her to stand as sentry. He is obviously used to command, but Jael is used to driving in tent pegs and easily pins his head into the ground. Satisfied with her work, she waits for Barak to turn up and coolly shows him what he's looking for. The commander of the armies which had oppressed Israel for 20 years is not only hiding in her tent, but she made it very certain he wasn't going anywhere. In this conflict, there are 3 heroic actors, Deborah, Barak, and Jael. But the author makes it clear that through all this, it is the Lord who defeats this enemy. Verse 15 shows that the Lord is directly involved with the battle, inflicting the enemy with divine terror. And concluding the entire episode in verse 23, it is the Lord who subdues the Canaanites.